notably, the orange roof lights have been removed, as I'm told, prior to Ralph Lauren acquiring the car. There had been numbers, side lights where the racing numbers had been, and also another light on the trunk of the car for the rear racing number. The correct leather straps for the hood tie-down are currently on the car. They weren't there when I acquired the car. And the plexiglass scoops that bring ventilation through the hood of the car are now correct. When I bought the car, they were a solid red. The two scoops on the side of the car have been are quite properly original. When I had the car, I think John Meekum had cut a third slot into the car to bring more cooling for the racing. The front of the car is very similar to the way I had it, with two major exceptions. The grille now has a proper grille surround with a prancing horse in the middle, and there are driving lights on either side of the grille. When I acquired the car, I think Meekum had removed the driving lights and had created vents for more cooling, I think, to the front brakes, and they were round as the round vents are currently on the just to the exterior of the driving lights. The three Zeus Fastener panels are as they were. They can be taken out. Just above the Ferrari badge is another Zeus Fastener panel, which is used to access the water radiator. On the side of the car, on the passenger side, there is another panel with its Zeus Fastener, and that accesses the dry sump for the oil. And the dipstick was easily, it seemed to me as I recall, a yard long, 3 feet long. It was quite a long dipstick, and it was quite a big reservoir, which means that in the cold weather you would have to warm the car quite a bit before it would come up to temperature as it should.
Where was this dipstick? Here?
If you open that panel, there is a screw cap that you undo, and attached to the screw cap is this long aluminum rod. Inside, when I had the car, there was a little bit of insulation and carpeting, and of course that's all gone now, as a race car wouldn't have that. And when I bought the car, the snorkels for ventilation were absent. I manufactured some, and those have been removed because they weren't correct, and none have taken their place. It has the correct steering wheel, the correct dashboard, and I noticed that the fire extinguisher that I had has long since disappeared. What else would I say? I noticed the leather pull cords to open the door from the inside, and it has the correct plexiglass slide windows. One anecdote that I'd tell you is, when I owned the car, one day these side panels, because their plexiglass got scratched and hazy and you couldn't see out of them well, so I stopped to have lunch and I left the car at a glass shop and said, "Give me new panels." And they made the new panels by the time I'd gotten back, but they said they cut one side, measured and cut one side, and used it as a template, only to find that the right side of the car was 2 inches different than the left side. Typical of an Italian race car.
Yeah, there is a scratch.
Yes. Yeah. The rear window correctly has the escape scoop in plexiglass that I had. When I had the car, there was a Ferrari insignia on the rear trunk lid. It is, of course, not there now. It has the correct tail light assembly, and you can notice that 3987 had a blended spoiler lip, whereas at least one of the very early cars had a bolt-on, and maybe more than one. You can see the jack stands in the back, and it has the proper snap extractor exhaust. And then there's also a bit of an aerodynamic device. If you look underneath, there's an airfoil. How effective it was, I don't know, but that is what we're looking at there. And maybe we'll walk around and see the other side.
Was it painted black when you had it inside?
No, I don't recall. I think it was red. These are the right wheels. When I bought the car, I had the original wheels, but I also it came with Lusso deep dish Baranis on them and a set of Goodyear Blue Streaks. So that's what I used every day and kept the original wheels separate. The jack points had chrome plugs, as you would see on a Lusso or a 250 GTE, to give it a more finished look. I didn't put them there, but there they were.
But you couldn't shave using the inside of that as a mirror back in those days.
No, you could not. And of course, the third slot was cut in to a head. And later, I think at least one of the later GTOs had 3 slots before the GTO 64 was made with 3 slots as a rule. I too had the lap belt, the racing lap belt, and shoulder harnesses. What else would I say? Can you see where the telltale is stuck on that?
0.
Well, that's indicative of something. In fact, I don't know, you won't believe this, but as you look at this car, the first day I got it back from an engine rebuild, I drove it up to Santa Barbara, and my sister was in the passenger seat, and my other sister was riding on the back parcel shelf. Now, if you look at that parcel shelf, you wouldn't think someone could get back there.
Wow.
But she did.
Somebody very fit.
Yeah, fit and slim and small. The roof is the roof line, according to Serge, who maintained the car for Ralph, said when they first got it, the roof line was not correct. He sensed that it had been rolled or somehow damaged. So the roof line is more conforming to an original silhouette, and of course the Le Mans lights that had been on the roof are now absent.
You sold the car to Alain de Cadenet, right?
Yes, Alain de Cadenet bought it from me and stored it for a time in Los Angeles. At one point he called me and asked if I would store it for him at my house, and of course I was happy to do that. And ultimately he sold the car to Stuart Baumgard, who I know personally. He was an orthopedic surgeon in Los Angeles, now I believe living in Hawaii.
Now, weren't there, just before Ralph Lauren, 2 partners who had the car? Because in the 90s, I spoke to a man who said, I went on holiday and my partner, when I came back, had sold the car to Ralph Lauren and hadn't mentioned it to me.
That's a new story to me. In fact, after Stuart had the car and sold it, I lost track of its provenance, where it went, and I have the impression, the memory, that it had gone to a Ferrari enthusiast collector dealer in Arizona.
Right.
And beyond that, I lost complete track of the car. It's about the time I maybe moved to France and had movies on my mind rather than cars. And then one day I picked up a book on the 250 GT and was surprised to see that my name was listed in the provenance of the car, and that the last owner was listed as R. Lauren. And I had been looking in a magazine about the Ralph Lauren collection a week earlier and saying, this man has selected the very cars that I would have selected had I had the means. I didn't know when I was looking at the magazine that it was my car that he had.
How precisely you were speaking?
I had no idea. On this car, at one point, after I'd had a particularly enthusiastic day at Willow Springs Raceway, the limited slip differential casing cracked and expanded, and it would lose its grip and suddenly make a right-hand turn without any warning. So I took it apart. I took the whole rear end of the car apart, and Canetti in back east steered me to a machine shop that could make another limited slip for me, and they did. Because the factory couldn't or wouldn't, and ZF didn't have any part numbers for the car. They just machined from a billet to specification. So I had it made and I put it back in, and the night that we completed the work, I put it into gear to go for a ride, and I found I had 5 gears in reverse and 1 going forward. I'd reversed it, put it in the wrong way, so we had to take it all apart again. That was that story. But this car, I would drive with, your book on the bread van was particularly poignant for me, because when I owned this car, my friend Matthew owned the bread van, and he and I used to race around together all the time, practically on a daily basis. And looking at this car now, I can only imagine what people must have thought upon seeing these two cars going by at 7,000 RPM together.
Yeah.
Every morning when I'd drive this car, I would back it out of the garage and hand wash it. So every day I was caressing the carrosserie, if you will, feeling its curves, looking at the nuance, and there are so many nuances. It's a beautiful car when you look at it, but when you touch and feel it and you see the different contours in the shade as you wash and dry the car, there are things that I don't think anybody ever would notice them if you weren't paying that kind of attention to it. It's quite an extraordinary car, and I think probably the most beautiful car, in my estimation, that I've ever seen.
Do you recall this lip there?
Quite frankly, I don't. That's not to say that it wasn't there, but as I look at it, it's not familiar to me in the way that everything else is.
Yeah, I'm not sure they will have that.
This little crease between the driver's window, the rear corner of the driver's window, and the rear window was there. And some GTOs, not this one of course, used to have a little opening here, a vertical vent that would clear air from the cockpit or one thing or another. This one never had that. And the other thing I noticed is the power bulge on this car, though it's obviously noticeable, and from if you're behind the wheel, the impression are these two huge bulges, fender bulges in that center.
Yeah.
It's quite a voluptuous thing to view from behind the wheel. But other GTOs I noticed seem to have a larger power bulge. And it strikes me as I look at this that they may have increased the size of the power bulge relative to what it was when I had the car.
Okay.
I think.
It does seem a bit big, yes. The nicest impression of the three things like that is the TR. I drove 0748 in a road rally near Torrey Pines, La Jolla, into the desert in '98. You really have those three bulges ahead of you.
Wasn't yours more flared?
Well, that's a good point. When I bought the car, it was wearing Goodyear Blue Streak racing tires, and the wheel arches, front and back, had a slight flare to them, a lip that obviously didn't come that way from the factory. It wasn't original. It fit the mood of the time and the tires I was running on, but they've been properly removed, and it's the way it came originally. Notice how tall the how tall the gear shift knob is. As you look at it, it seems to be too high. But when you're driving the car, and if you're driving with your hands at the 10 to 2 position, your 2 o'clock hand has only an inch or two to go. And with your fingers, you wouldn't even have to grip the knob. You could use 2 fingers on it to push it where it wanted to go. It was the nicest gear change I've ever experienced in any car. Nothing I've ever driven since then came close. Yeah, it was fantastic. The synchro mesh were great, and it was a very light control. As was the rest of the car. It was not a heavy car to drive even on the street at slow speeds.
It's the beginning of the reasoning that led to, a million years later, to paddle shifters.
Yes. It's
gain
practically
time with shifting.
You would say it's practically the same effort involved.
Yeah.
That may be a bit of an overstatement, but not by much.
How tall were your trumpets, your snorkels?
My snorkels were completely off of what they should have been. I didn't understand that I probably could have gone to a hardware store and made the correct ones out of some elbow PVC joints. Mine were about, I would guess, 6 to 8 inches long, and they had a single curvature, a gentle curvature, whereas the correct ones had a 90-degree angle at a certain point, and weren't very, very large, quite frankly, or long.
Right.
What else?
Do you feel that the rear glass and that bubble are the same, or they've been replaced? They look replaced.
Well, I'm sure they haven't because they're pristine. Although there are treatments you can put on the plexiglass to smooth out the crazing, if you will. Airline companies offer them, but I would say that's probably new. But it looks quite right.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had a light here on the rear.
For the number?
For the racing rondelle, yes.
And these look new, don't they?
They're new, I'm sure, but they're accurate.
Yeah.
So it's, all in all, we're looking at the car on a raised platform. But if you can imagine a viewpoint, 12 inches higher than where we are, you start to get a sense of how low this car is to the ground. Mm-hmm. And how voluptuous it is as it sits there in front of you. And it also always looks like it's ready to spring, almost like a panther poised to jump.
Yep.
And I have yet to find a bad angle on this car where it doesn't look exquisite. Some cars, in my experience, the weak point on most cars is the rear three-quarter view. That tends to be where the design falls apart. But on this car, it is absolutely sublime from every angle, including this three-quarter rear. It is absolutely delicious.
I prefer the GTO 64 design, but it does have some flaws, some bad angles, whereas this doesn't.
Yeah, this is. The first time I saw this car, it was a few years before I bought it. Someone else was driving it on San Vicente Boulevard in Brentwood. It's coming the other way, and it took my breath away, as though you'd seen Brigitte Bardot walking down the street, and you just went, "Oh my God!" And I saw the car, and from that day forward, I wanted a GTO. When one day the mechanic that worked on my Lusso called me to say, "There's a GTO in the shop, and they want to sell. Do you want to buy it?" And I said, "Tell them it's sold. I want the car." I had no idea it was the same one that I'd seen that day, but it was.
Like when Steve McQueen saw Matt Tetzinger go by in the bread van one day.
Well, no, it was me.
It was you? Okay, sorry.
I was driving the GTO on Santa Monica Boulevard. Excuse me, Sunset Boulevard. It was sunset. I had the roof lights on, and he was coming the other way in his XKSS. And he pulled up. We were both at a red light facing each other, and he's staring, and I'm staring, and the red light turns to green. Neither of us move. He inches up into the intersection to get a closer look. Traffic's backing up behind both of us. And finally, he gives me that big Steve McQueen grin that he's famous for and waves, and I wave back. He went off up Kenter, and I went up Sunset. We both probably shot off at about 7,000 RPM right away. It was quite an interesting moment.
Very special. Very special.
I remember standing at the gas pumps putting gas into this car. Mm-hmm. It's a big racing tank, so you took a lot more gasoline than any other passenger car would. And in those days, gasoline was 29 cents a gallon for top grade. And, believe it or not, they gave premium stamps, redeemable stamps in those days. I think it was blue chip stamps. And after I'd filled the car to the brim, the guy would stand there dialing out these stamps for 5 minutes. It practically filled a book, which I didn't collect, but my stepmother did, so I brought them home for her.
Good.
And there was nothing like the sound of this car when you started it up. That constant frequency starter, almost like an aircraft starter instead of the cyclical starter of a normal passenger car. Mm-hmm. It sounded like you were engaging a starter on a fighter plane.
Yeah.
And you could hear the timing chains and the breathing of the carburetors. It was a really essential experience all the way around, even if you never drove off.
So how does it impact you seeing it all this time?
Well, it's as pretty as I knew it would be. It's absolutely stunning. I'd like nothing better than to get in and drive it around the block, and then some. And I think that as I stand here looking at it, It's obvious to me that it deserves its reputation. It deserves its place in history as an iconic Ferrari. And I think, quite frankly, it merits the price people ask for them.
Right. And you have no negative thoughts about seeing it all restored? That doesn't sadden you, or I mean?
You know, I'm of many minds about that. I think when you restore a passenger car, you want it to look like the day it came from the factory.
Yeah.
I think when you restore a racing car, my view is you restore it to the epitome of its heyday.
Yeah.
For example, if I were to take Rob Walker's short wheelbase Ferrari, it would be in his dark blue colors with a white stripe across the hood, because that signifies the time that Sterling Moss drove it so famously. This car, although blue is not my favorite color, I'd be inclined to put it into the John Meekum colors, restore the lights to the roof, restore the racing lights, because it is a racing car, and this is in a generic form. But you could also say, if you look at pictures of the car when it first raced under the Nart banner, its first race out at Montlhéry, with the Rodriguez brothers driving, this is what the car looked like. It's not a lot of people remember that it won its first race, or that the Rodriguez brothers raced it, because 1,000 kilometers of Paris wasn't as memorable, say, as Le Mans. But it did, and if I'm not mistaken, as I've seen a picture of the grid, this car was on the grid, and so was the bread van on that
62?
day. 63.
63? No, it just did 62.
Well, maybe it was 62.
The 62, basically there were a lot of GTOs and the bread van, E-types. The grid was quite impressive.
Then it was 62 that I was thinking of, because I've seen the picture and both cars are there. And it's quite... My big sadness in all of this is that Matthew and I never put the cars together for filming or photographing them together. I think it would have been spectacular had we done so.
With Peter Helm around, that would have been something. Huh?
Well, Peter was a good friend of both Matthew and I. In fact, Matthew introduced me to him. So the fact that it didn't happen is an anomaly, because Peter took his camera everywhere he went.
Yeah, it's back then nobody took photos, you know. I mean, I just worked 1 week on the Mura register of Simon Kidston, and it went from 1,000 photos to 10,000.
Really?
Because of digital photography.
Extraordinary.
In the old days, nobody took photos, as you well know.
Well, when I sold the car, I had a professional photographer who's a friend of mine meet me up in Griffith Park in the hills.
Right.
And I had him take some photographs of the car parked under a tree, and having me do drive-bys coming out of the tunnel in the mountain up there. Yeah. They were magnificent photos, but they are lost owing to misfortune. I tell people my possessions were lost at sea, and it might have been, it's a good metaphor, because everything, masters of movies that I've made, and production stills, and posters, and a lot of great souvenirs just are lost to me. The only thing that it's a great pity. The only thing that remains to me to this day are about 6 photographs that I'd taken of the car in front of my house with an Instamatic Kodak. Some
of which you lent me for the book.
Yes, they appear in your book. And the other is, strangely enough, I've retained the gear shift knob. That was my only souvenir that I took from the car when I sold it to Alain de Cadenet. When I used to drive this car around, it had on the lower right front passenger side of the windshield a decal from the Ferrari Owners Club in England. They had the Prescott hill climb.
Right.
And so I was a member of both the Ferrari Club in Los Angeles and the Ferrari Club in Great Britain.
Good. I think that
I covered the subject, I believe.
Yeah.